Welcome, students, to Classics 160 B1. Meet the Ancients! And today's class where we move north from Egypt into the Aegean. Alright, let's go ahead and fire this up here. I, of course, am your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today what we are doing, we are going to see what's going on in the Greek world, alright? We're finally moving into the world of ancient Greece, although it's going to be, well, 1,000 years before we get any semblance of democracy or Plato or the Parthenon or any of those things. So we're going back in time quite a bit, but we're going into that region. So let's go ahead and we'll turn down the lights, we'll fire up the projector, and we'll get started with lecture 3.2, the Aegean Bronze Age. All right, so what we got on the docket today, we are going to start with announcements. Those are going to be pretty much what you're normally expecting right now. We will do a brief recap of ancient Egypt, and I will ask you guys some questions about some of the major periods in Egyptian history and see whether you guys kind of know the broad details of what happened in those. And then we're going to focus on two cultures from the Aegean Bronze Age. We'll start with the Minoans, who I like to call the hippies of the ancient Mediterranean, and then we will move to the mighty militaristic Mycenaeans. So that is the plan for today. Let's see what we have on the docket for announcements. You guys know the basics. Go ahead and put this thing in speaker view. If it's not already there, you can see me, you can see the slides, you can see the words, you can see the images, you can see everything you need to see. If you have a question during the class, please go ahead and direct that to your TA. They will funnel that to me or they'll answer you directly. We'll find out some way to get you an answer. Have no fear. I haven't checked this yet, but your homework from last week should be graded now. Yeah? TAs? Awesome. All right, if it's done, fantastic. If you still have a few to go, we are working hard on that. But I want everybody to go in and check your feedback before doing this week's homework assignment, all right? Your TAs are working particularly hard, especially on this very first homework, so that you can get kind of very specific feedback in terms of what you need to do to ace those homework assignments, all right? So get into D2L, read the feedback. I don't know if you guys know this, but like we can actually see in D2L like when you've read the feedback or whether you've read it or not. And there's nothing more disappointing than like going in and writing all this feedback and being like, all right, Billy, well, your argument is like super good, but you need to work on how you support it with sources, and your style, it's very clear, but it's a little overly conversational. Try to formalize it a little bit. And then we see that Billy didn't even look at it at all. So do take some time over the next day or two to check out your TA's feedback and try to incorporate that in terms of moving towards Friday's class or Friday's homework assignment. For honors students, that stuff is up on D2L. Again, what we're going to do is I'm going to have you guys stick around kind of in the second half of the class on Friday, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what that project's going to be like, so have that on your docket. And homework reading response number due is due tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. Friday. It's due Friday. What you guys are reading this week are Linear B tablets, all right? This is, you guys get to play the role of like Bronze Age historian. And when you read these things, you're going to learn a little bit about them today. But when you read them, you're going to be like, what does this say about anything? This is like a few words jammed together. It doesn't tell you anything about anything. That's okay, all right? These are the only texts we have from Greece during the Bronze Age, okay? And so you guys get to play the role of Greek historian here and try to figure out what we can actually learn from those. If you're confused about it, if you're not 100% confident in your conclusions, totally fine. Remember, what we want to see is we want to see an argument. We want to see that argument made clearly. We want to see it supported with evidence from the texts. And we want you to kind of communicate that in a semi-formal kind of academic style, but still a real emphasis on clarity there. So do that, and you're going to be in great shape. All right. Other announcements. For the second time in a week, I've got good news on the men's basketball team. We beat Arizona State again, and I watched the game. It wasn't even as close as the score indicates. This was like a 20-point game for the most part. Men's basketball team looking really good. Women's basketball team, we've had a couple games postponed, but have no fear, I'm not leaving them out. We just have to wait until they get playing again for your women's basketball team updates. But yeah, good news on the basketball front. Okay, so let's go ahead and recap ancient Egypt. The early dynastic period starts around 3000 BC, somewhere around there. And if that time looks familiar, that's right around the same time the Bronze Age is starting in Mesopotamia as well. And one of our most important, most famous artifacts is what we're looking at over here, right? With the Narmer palette. And who can tell me, who can throw in the chat a little bit about the iconography here? Like, what is it about this thing that gives us information about the earliest days of a unified Egypt? The dude's hat. That's right. If we look at it, on one side he's wearing the crown of Upper Egypt. On the other side he's wearing the crown of Lower Egypt. The kind of entanglement of these like mythical beast heads here, very good, right? The subjugation of the kind of like symbolic representation of Lower Egypt by the falcon god Horus over here. The kind of, it's not so much a scepter that we're looking at, but this is a mace, right? It is kind of a ceremonial thing. Usually use it to bash people's heads in, kind of like you see over here. Yeah, all those things taken together, what we're looking at is we have some sort of evidence for the unification process of Upper Egypt down here, and Lower Egypt up here, coming together. All right, then we move in to the Old Kingdom, right? So the Old Kingdom, it's dynasties 3 through 6, and this gets going in the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, all right? So around 2600, 2700, and lasts until the end of the 3rd millennium BCE. And what we see here, right, is the construction of the pyramids. And who can tell me a little bit about what is a pyramid, right? And what is the kind of goal of having a pyramid? Any thoughts there? Yeah, good. So it kind of arises from what we're looking at here, which is known as a mastaba tomb. And that's a representation of the primordial mound, which in Egyptian mythology, this is the first piece of land that arises when the floodwaters recede. And it's from that piece of land that all life and all the gods and all people eventually arise. Very good. It's all, and what these are, right? These are tombs. And so these are actually burial places for the king. And this is very, very important, right? It's very important that they have a tomb where they're protected and it's large and it's magnificent, because this is also kind of their house for eternity. When you look at these things, these are part of very large complexes that have temples where they can be worshipped after their death, where they're surrounded by tombs for their nobles, where there's other sorts of temples and shrines and things like that associated for the spirit of the king. And when you look at it, what you almost kind of see is a recreation of the actual royal palatial complex, but in the realm of the dead, right? So the king's kind of recreating his own life in the actual real world for his life in the afterlife. And we can see here, right, what we're looking at is the evolution of the pyramid from the mastaba tombs to the step pyramid, to the almost true pyramid, to the true pyramid of Giza. Now, and again, keep in mind, one of the very interesting things here is just simply how early this is happening. We're going to see today what's going on in Greece at the very same time. Okay, So when we move to the Middle Kingdom, right, there are still pyramids. Pyramids still exist, but I mean, look at these things. Geez, come on, Middle Kingdom pharaohs. Are you even trying anymore? And to some extent, right, they're not trying as much because they're putting their emphasis elsewhere, right? Who can tell me a little bit about what's going on with kingship during the Middle Kingdom? What are some of the things we associate with the Middle Kingdom that we'd want to keep in mind here? So literature flourishes, right? And that literature is kind of about daily life, which is really a change from the Old Kingdom, which is more about the gods and the pharaoh. What we can see here, right? The king is portraying himself as the shepherd of the people, right? Kind of emphasizing the hard work and labor it takes to rule over his people and to keep them safe and provide for them. We get a big emphasis on daily life and some of the material culture, very, very good. The myth of Osiris becomes very, very popular, and we associate that with mummification as well. So yeah, great stuff, right? Like what we're seeing is even though the pyramids are turning into a big pile of rubble, Egypt is thriving in other sorts of ways, right? The concept of kingship has changed a little bit, and other aspects of Egyptian culture are flourishing. Then we move to the New Kingdom, right? So the second half of the second millennium. And remember, this is something that if it's been a while since you've done ancient history, the time periods can be difficult to kind of grasp, right? But remember when we're in BC times, right? When we're in before the Common Era. When I say the second millennium, BC or BCE, what that means is the 1000s BCE. And the third millennium BCE is the 2000s, right? So you kind of got to subtract one to get that time frame. Just like when we say the 19th century in American history is actually the 1800s, right? You subtract one there. Okay, so in the New Kingdom, what's some of the stuff that goes on with the New Kingdom? We got one of those, right? Imperialism is big, right? So Egypt is expanding its power for the first time outside of its traditional area in the Nile Delta and in the Nile River Valley, and it's going south into Nubia, right? Modern day Sudan. It's going north and east into the Levant. It's going west into Libya. We get the Battle of Kadesh during the New Kingdom. That's right. We get powerful, powerful pharaohs like the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. And you know, first of all, I think it's awesome that we have a female vice president right now, but it still gets me that like we're talking 3,500 years ago, a woman is ruling over like the mightiest kingdom in the world at the time, and we still haven't had a woman president. Like that strikes me as kind of wild, and it strikes me as very backwards today. But hopefully that is not the case for much longer. Anyway, I won't get into politics, but I find it amazing and impressive that we have a woman 3,500 years ago ruling over the strongest state in the world at the time. Okay, what else are we going to associate with the New Kingdom? That's right, temples, right? So instead of cultures putting their effort, or instead of the Egyptians putting their effort towards pyramids, now a lot of that work is going towards temples, right? And we can see those, some examples of like the temples of Amun at Karnak and at Luxor. These are down in the southern part of the country. And so those become very, very big. And what happens right at the peak, right? The cult of Amun is flourishing. Egypt is expanding outside of the Nile River Valley. What happens then? What kind of weird twist happens? That's exactly right. We get Amenhotep IV, who starts out as a completely normal pharaoh, then changes his name, changes all of Egyptian religion, says the only thing you're worshiping anymore is the sun disk, or the Aten, right? That's the second half of his name there. Changes the way that the pharaohs portray themselves in art, right? This is a very, very different style. The Aten here is extending its rays or its arms of the sun, giving out little ankhs, or the symbol of life. All of a sudden, the whole royal family is portrayed, right? With his wife Nefertiti and his kids, eventually one of them King Tut, right? And he moves the capital from Thebes into the middle of the country, an entirely new capital city. So he is changing everything. And it turns out that when he dies, most of the country is like not cool. And we get his successor and son, Tutankhamun, who ends up switching things back. So in terms of big picture Egyptian history, the reason King Tut's important is he restores traditional Egyptian religion. But the reason he's important archaeologically, right? He is the one kind of undisturbed tomb, the one tomb that made it unlooted through antiquity until the modern time when Howard Carter in 1922 found that tomb, excavated it, and found the coffin and sarcophagus and actual body of King Tut in that tomb. Now, after that, we move into the 19th dynasty. We get Ramses II, right? He's seen as like one of the biggest, baddest conquerors of Egyptian history here. He is the one who's fighting against the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, right? And so he rules for 66 years, right? We can see Kadesh, where is it? Right up there. And he's just known as an incredibly prolific pharaoh in terms of both his militaristic conquests and his architectural program, where he builds more than just about any other Egyptian pharaoh. And like we were talking about, right, the Battle of Kadesh, which you guys are all experts now, Egypt is basically moving north to the site of Kadesh. The Hittites, right, I don't know if you guys were able to get this from the text, what they're doing is they're kind of hiding behind the city. And as the Egyptian line gets strung out, what happens is the Hittites take their chariots and they blast into the middle of the Egyptian line, right? And they kind of scatter the Egyptians. And then the only thing that actually ends up saving the Egyptians is the fact that they were spread out, and it's the last like chariot contingent that ends up moving north and kind of saving the day and being able to fend off the Hittites there. And you saw from the peace treaty that eventually what they do is they say, let's just kind of let's just keep things as they are, right? We will continue to maintain the same boundary between these empires. But it's not that far afterwards. It's only about 100 years afterwards that we start getting evidence of what are known as the Sea Peoples. So this really diverse group of naval marauders coming together to attack Egypt. And Ramses III, one of the successors here, talks about him fighting these guys off and how it wasn't a big deal, and he smashed them and blew them to smithereens. But very shortly after that, Egypt descends into the Third Intermediate Period, and it never really regains the same level of stability and power that it had during the New Kingdom. And the reason I wanted to conclude with this in terms of the recap is because this is going to become a very, very popular explanation for what's happening not just in Egypt, but in the entire Mediterranean right around this same time. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into the Mediterranean, and we're going to start with the Minoans, who again I like to call the hippies of the Mediterranean. We'll talk about that, why that's the case here. There we go. Okay, so to set the stage, right, remember what's going on in the second millennium, the 1000s BC. Egypt is looking strong. We've got empires in Mesopotamia. The Hittites are building and expanding, right? During this time, this little area over here is still a backwater. Not much is going on over here, okay? And what does start going on builds up relatively slowly compared to the empires of the Near East and of Egypt. Now, geographically, what you're looking at here, this is what we call kind of ancient Anatolia. It's modern day Turkey. this is mainland Greece, right? Modern day Greece. We've got the island of Crete down here. And then we've got this sea in the middle, all right? And this is a very connective sea. There's islands all over the place. So people traveled across here frequently in antiquity. And when we get into classical Greece, we have to kind of keep in mind that a term like Greece or Turkey, in terms of a modern country, or in terms of like a country, is a very modern creation, okay? So in antiquity, almost this kind of whole world here, right? Part of modern day Turkey, bunch of the islands, part of mainland Greece. This is all kind of considered the Greek world. And it's centered on this sea, which is known as the Aegean Sea, named after the dad of, anybody know who King Aegeus is the dad of? Not Odysseus. Theseus, that's exactly right. Good, good. Yeah, and we're actually going to hear about Theseus too, because he's going to play a role in Minoan culture here, all right? Very good. So, the Aegean Sea, named after the dad of Theseus. It's kind of a sad story there. You got to take the mythology class to hear that one. But Minoan culture is centered on the island of Crete down here. So a little separated from the mainland, and we'll see that it also starts expanding into some of these islands as well. And then Mycenaean culture, which we'll talk about in the second half of the class, is up here in what we'd consider mainland Greece. All right, so remember the age of the pyramids, right? The 2000s BC, the third millennium BC. This is what we got going on in Greece at the same time, all right? So on the mainland, this is our biggest structure during that time. It's called the House of the Tiles. It's at a site called Lerna. And you can see the plan of the house here. You can see the actual photo of the archaeological remains. Let's keep in mind what's going on in Egypt versus what's going on in Greece, all right? Now, Greece is going to go on to do amazing things, but during the third millennium, they are a slow starter compared to what's going on in the Near East and in Egypt. Now, that being said, they do produce some cool stuff. And probably the most famous type of artifact from the third millennium BC are these, what we call these Cycladic figurines. And the Cyclades are these islands here. They call them Cycladic because it's from the Greek word for circle. And they kind of viewed these islands as forming some sort of circle around the sacred island of Delos. So these figurines were they were common finds from the third millennium in that region, and archaeologists and really kind of everybody has really taken to these in large part because they have a very modern, abstract, geometric aesthetic to them. It really kind of looks like modern art in a way. People debate exactly what they were for in antiquity, but there seems to be some sort of emphasis on fertility where you can see the kind of female genitalia emphasized there, the breasts emphasized, that sort of thing. And then we get a few of the figurines doing things or doing something kind of unique, like this harp player over here. But still a very different scale than what's going on in Egypt and the Near East. Now, the Minoan period, the kind of period of the Minoan culture, starts around 2000 BC. So the second millennium, the beginning of the second millennium BC. And what we're going to see is marked by palaces and these beautiful frescoes. One thing I want you to keep in mind, and this came up in a question a little bit a while ago, is that what we're looking at here when we see many of these frescoes, it's a little bit imaginative. So you can see here what's actually ancient, all right? You see this really rough stuff here? That's actually what's preserved. And you see the rest of this? That's like the kind of modern recreation put on top of it, all right? And they base those on archaeological remains or other depictions of women or something along those lines. But it's just kind of useful to keep in mind when you're looking at these things. Part of it is actually the archaeological remains, and part of it is like what the archaeologists thought it should look like. Now, if you're thinking of the Minoans and you're wondering, like, why do we call them the Minoans? That's not like a site of Minoa or something like that. It's named after King Minos, who's he's the first king of the island of Crete. And that story all begins, and again, you can learn more about this in the mythology class. It all begins like every single Greek myth almost ever, with Zeus looking down from Olympus and finding a babe and being like, ooh, she's really attractive. And what he does is he turns himself into a bull and he infiltrates her flock of cattle. And she sees this bull and she is like, that is a beautiful bull. And she goes up and she pets the bull. And then she eventually sits on the bull. And immediately when that happens, Zeus, in the form of this bull, flies away, jumps into the water, swims from North Africa to the island of Crete. And this woman, Europa, becomes like the first queen of the island. And she gives birth to Minos, and he becomes the first king of the island. Now, King Minos has to do one thing, right? Every year, I mean, he's the king of the island, right? Every year, he's only got to do one thing, that is sacrifice his best bull to Poseidon. But one year, what happens, right? He's got this, one year, the bull is just so beautiful. He's like, I can't slaughter this bull. Like, I've got to keep this one for myself. So he sacrifices his second best bull to Poseidon. And you can imagine how that turns out, right? Like, this is one of the Olympians. You're not going to fool Poseidon. And so what ends up happening is Poseidon puts this spell on his wife. And his wife falls in love with that bull. And then they have little half bull, half human babies, which we of course call the Minotaur, right? From Minos, kind of half bull, this little monstrosity that you can see over here. That's kind of half human, half bull. And this monster is so like horrific that they have to put him down into the Labyrinth to kind of keep him away from everybody. But every year, Athens is actually in debt to this little city-state, right? The city-state of Knossos, where this labyrinth is supposedly taking place. And what they have to do is they have to send 7 boys and 7 girls over to the king, and that, like, those kids are then put down into the labyrinth, and the Minotaur basically kills them and eats them. All until the Athenian hero Theseus says that's enough of that, and he goes, and the daughter of the king falls in love with Theseus, and she gives him a little ball of yarn that he can unravel as he walks his way in. He defeats the Minotaur and then unwraps the thread on his way out, and he like is able to slay the Minotaur and then escape from the island. And Ariadne and Theseus go off to the island of Naxos to live happily ever after, until Theseus gets bored of her, and then he's like, nah, I'm good. And then he just sails away back to Athens by himself. But Ariadne actually ends up marrying Dionysus, so it's not that bad for her. And Theseus, in his haste to get away from her, forgets to put up the white sails, signifying that he's still alive, and instead sails back to Athens under the black sails. And that's where his dad, King Aegeus, sees the ship pulling up, and he knows it's his son's ship. And he sees the black sails, and he thinks that his son has not made it out of the labyrinth alive. And that's why King Aegeus throws himself off the cliff into the sea below. And that's why we call it the Aegean Sea. So, a little bit of mythology and history kind of mixing together in the early days. Now, there was a question in the chat, is the labyrinth real? And the answer is kinda, sorta. All right, if that makes sense. What we're looking at here is a partially reconstructed area of the palace, what they call the Palace of King Minos, at the site of Knossos, which is in kind of the northern part of the island of Crete, right about in the middle here, okay? And it flourishes during the 2nd millennium BC from about 1900 to about 1400. Now this is there are multiple Minoan palaces. This is the largest one. And when you look at it, from an aerial view, you can kind of sort of see why they associate this with a labyrinth, right? I mean, look at how complex this palace actually is. And so there's kind of, associations between the Palace of Knossos and this labyrinth that we get from Greek mythology. Now, that's kind of the mythological association. We also can learn quite a bit about the Minoan economy and social structure from something like this. So, for instance, this is a huge building, right? I mean, this is quite large compared to anything that came before it. Way, way bigger than the House of the Tiles that we saw from 1,000 years earlier. We can also see that all these little rooms that kind of look like the labyrinth, these are storage rooms. And so what we think is happening, what archaeologists and historians of the period think is happening, is that this kind of palace controls some surrounding area. And what people are doing is sending some of their goods to the palace, right? So if you're a farmer of olives, right, you send a bunch of your olives to the palace. And if you're a herder of sheep, you send a bunch of your sheep to the palace. And the palace stores some of this stuff and then gives it back to different people. And this is what we call a redistributive economy. And what that allows for is it allows for you to specialize in what you're best at. If you're awesome at growing olives, that means all you do is grow olives. Send some of those away, and you know that in return you're going to be getting the diversity of goods that you need to survive, right? So you send your olives away, and what you get back sheep and textiles and wine and that sort of thing, all right? So again, the kind of plan of the palace itself is suggestive of this sort of redistributive economy. Now, when we look at some of the archaeological remains, one of the things that we see that's kind of fascinated archaeologists are frescoes everywhere. And a fresco, when I use that term, that's actually denoting a special type of painting. Okay, so a fresco is when you paint on wet plaster. So you've got your paint, the plaster of the wall is still wet, and when you paint it on there and then it dries, the color actually becomes part of the wall itself. And that's how some of these things stay preserved over thousands and thousands of years. And at the Palace of Knossos, what we end up seeing is that there's a huge emphasis on this sort of like floral and faunal iconography. So you get dolphins and you get plants, you get weird blue monkeys, and people like, I don't know, you're like, what kind of drugs are you on? Like painting blue monkeys running around. That's not a thing. And that's kind of why we call them the hippies of the Mediterranean. We do that for one other reason, and that's when we go back to this. There's one thing that's missing when you look at a palace like this. Any idea what that is? Any idea what you're not seeing here? Yeah, it's defensive walls. We're going to see when we get to Mycenae, huge defensive walls. At the Minoan site of Knossos and at all the other palaces, none of these have defensive walls, which is super weird for the ancient world. Usually when you build your fortress, your palace, the first thing you do is you build a giant set of defensive walls because somebody else is going to want to take your stuff. Okay, so they're painting blue monkeys and dolphins and plants, and they don't have any walls. Hippies of the ancient Mediterranean. We also get this throne room here, which is kind of cool, also suggestive of some sort of monarchic political structure. Again, a kind of king presiding over this sort of palace. And again, as we move through these frescoes, one of the things that comes about is a huge emphasis on the bull. So here we can see some sort of acrobatic performance or competition where we've got priests of some sort on the sides and then some sort of youth here, right, leaping over the back of the bull. And this, it shows up in several different ways. So we end up seeing this sort of iconography in frescoes, we end up seeing it in little statuettes, we end up seeing it on pottery. So we think this was a common sort of athletic performance at the time. The bull also shows up in a bunch of other areas, right? So we've got little ceramic depictions of it. These are known as Rhotons. And what you do there is you put some sort of liquid in the top of it, and then you pour it forward. and the liquid, like wine or something like that, comes out of either the nostrils or the mouth, kind of a cool thing there. These are known as horns of consecration, and you see those throughout the palaces, and we think that's where sacrifices would have been performed. So the bull ends up being a huge part, we think, of Minoan religion, even though we don't have a lot of texts explaining how that religion worked. Now, finally, as we go through Minoan culture, it seems to have expanded beyond just the island of Crete, right? It's centered on the island of Crete, but we get examples of Minoan culture elsewhere. And nowhere is it more dramatically situated than the island of Thera here, okay? So this is the modern island of Santorini. It was the ancient site of Thera. And you can go there and you can look at these Minoan-style frescoes, Minoan-style houses. Everything seems very, very similar to what you would find on the island of Crete. And so scholars have debated about whether this is a Minoan colony, right? Somebody from Crete went out and actually founded a colony, or whether there's just kind of influence in terms of material culture spreading throughout the islands. Now, the island of Thera, I wonder if we got a... Let's go back a little bit. I want to show you where this thing is here before we kind of take a look at it. There we go. Okay, so here's the island of Crete, right? Big old island. And here's Thera down here, in the southern part of the Cyclades, right? So it's still relatively close to Crete compared to a bunch of the other islands here. And then we zoom forward back again. And what ends up happening is that there's some sort of massive volcanic eruption. Now, scholars have debated when this is. The most kind of recent convincing analysis says it's sometime during the 1500s BCE. And what ends up happening is that this Minoan culture that was on the island basically disappears, right? The island itself blows up. So this is what the island would have looked like prior to the eruption. And then after the eruption, this is what you look at. This is what it looks like now. And this is why people love going there. So all the modern settlement is right along the rim over here. So you have these amazing views over the Aegean, over kind of the other side of this. The rest of what we call a caldera, which is the kind of pit of the volcano. And so only kind of the caldera is left, and that's where people settle today. And as a result of this kind of like advanced Minoan culture, some people have argued that this is kind of the inspiration for Atlantis, right? This kind of advanced Minoan culture on the island of Thera that then gets blown to smithereens by the volcano. It's debatable. I don't think most scholars really think that's the case, but it's a nice theory to think with. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move north and west to mainland Greece. Okay, so here's where we were with the Minoans, the island of Crete, and then Thera up here. And the Mycenaeans are right around here, right? Mostly in this southern area of mainland Greece. Now, whereas the Minoans are known as kind of, or I call them the hippies of the Mediterranean, with no defensive walls, painting purple monkeys and dolphins, and just having this nice little beautiful life, the Mycenaeans are known for their militaristic culture, and we'll see that here. So the first thing you can see is named after the site of Mycenae. There's no real like mythology story to go with it like we have with the Minoans there. But what you can see when you look at an aerial photo, look at the walls that surround this thing, all right? I mean, this is truly like an elevated citadel or fortress. It's set up on a hilltop, and then what you have surrounding all the different kind of buildings on the interior are simply massive walls. And when you get to building walls in antiquity, the way that you actually do it is you build a front face to it, and then you build an interior face to it, and you make those things really nice, and then you fill it with a bunch of rubble. And that's kind of what you're looking at here. Okay, so Mycenaean culture, named after the main site of Mycenae. And we can see kind of a reconstruction of what this looked like over here. So the Minoan palace on the right-hand side, lacking any sort of defensive structure. And then the Mycenaean fortress over here on the left, again, entirely surrounded by these really huge walls. But other than that, we think that things are happening somewhat similarly with kind of the economy flowing into the palace and then flowing out in some sort of redistributive sense. The walls themselves are known as Cyclopean Walls because you can see the actual blocks here. The thinking is that it's only a Cyclops who could throw and move such large boulders, right? It's after a story in the Odyssey where Polyphemus, right, is chucking huge boulders at Odysseus as Odysseus sails away, trying to sink the ship there, right? And even though Polyphemus and the Cyclops is not at all related to Heracles, he kind of has the strength of Heracles. So let's go ahead and take a couple minutes here and do our attendance for today. Go to quiz number 4, January 27th, and the answer is Yeller. All right, so go ahead and choose Yeller for today, and then we'll pick it back up in about 2 minutes and finish off with the Mycenaeans. Oh, and the drink of the day is just an old water bottle filled with just regular water. And it's disgusting. There's few things I hate in life more than regular water. And I mean, it has no flavor. I don't know. I need to get back on the actual vitamin rains for my hydration purposes. All right, when the volcano exploded, did it sink Crete or Thera? It did not sink Crete, but it did cover Thera, right? So when you're looking at Thera, it's kind of like a Pompeii situation where the blast would have covered it in ash and soot and that sort of thing. Please try Celsius, the best drink ever. All right, I will do this. I'm going to put it on the grocery list for next week. When it comes to the eruption of the volcano, a lot of people thought early on that's what brought Bronze Age culture in this region to an end. Because it's difficult to date exactly. And people thought that when we see this huge drop-off, we're going to talk about that next week, that the cause might have been some sort of natural disaster like this eruption. Now we've moved the date early enough that we still get cultures flourishing after the eruption, so we don't think that's quite the case anymore. All right, so after you choose Yeller, let's go ahead and jump back in to the mighty Mycenaeans here. We're looking at the site of Mycenae here. This is known as the Lion's Gate. This is the only monumental the only monumental sculpture from the Mycenaean Bronze Age in Greece. And it's actually cool. It both has this kind of iconographic function to it, right? Signaling the strength of those inside. It's also architecturally useful. So what it does is it relieves some of the weight. It's made out of a lighter stone, and so it takes some of the weight off of this stone here, which is known as the lintel, which sits above the entranceway to the city. Now, Mycenae was excavated by this guy, Heinrich Schliemann, and this is just to kind of keep in mind that when we get the story of what's going on at these sites, it's always kind of told through the archaeologist's eyes, and sometimes they have their own way of... You're not necessarily seeing exactly what happened. It's mediated through somebody else's vision of it. Now, Schliemann was a crazy guy. He was also the discoverer of Troy, right? The site of like the Trojan War. And he was known for going around with a copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey in one hand, right? And like an excavation trowel or a pickaxe in the other hand. So he's the guy who excavates the site of Mycenae. He digs up a bunch of stuff. He dresses his wife in all this jewelry that he finds. You're not allowed to do that anymore. That's like not a cool thing to do. But he has like little photo shoots of his wife in this ancient jewelry. And he's kind of reconstructed a lot from the site. One of the areas that he did excavate are these royal graves, these kind of circular areas. These contain what are known as shaft graves, where you dig down about 30 feet, and then there's a chamber at the bottom that contains the burial. And these graves were incredibly, incredibly rich, right? So one of the most famous artifacts from this period is known as the Mask of Agamemnon. So it's a burial mask made out of kind of tapped gold, right? Etched? I don't know exactly what the right term is called there. People have started arguing that it's fake now because they found more of these, and these are what the other ones look like. And this is what like the Mask of Agamemnon looks like. And the kind of most damning evidence is that he has a beard, which looks very suspiciously like beards that people had in like the 1900s and like early 1910s. And so they think it might be fake, but nobody really knows for sure. Either way, these burials were incredibly, incredibly wealthy in terms of their gold, gold jewelry, like revetments for different pieces of chariots and stuff like that. And they were also very militaristic. So we can see this boar's tusk military helmet here, right? So made out of the tusks of wild boars. We can see bronze swords inlaid with gold and electrum over here. These actually look like kind of, if you ever watch Game of Thrones, the little entryway into the Game of Thrones is taken off of these Bronze Age swords with the decoration on them. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. Oh, I got concluding thoughts here. I didn't think I was done yet. Okay, we're going to wrap it up in 2 minutes when the class actually finishes. One of the other things that's found, not so much at the site at Mycenae, but at other Mycenaean palaces, are these things called Linear B tablets. And Linear B is the script that's on them. And so remember, the script is the kind of way the letter looks, and the language is the language that's used for it. So an example would be, we use the Latin alphabet to write English, and to write Spanish, and to write French, and to write German, right? Latin is the script. Latin's also a language, but it's the script, and then we have lots of different languages within it. In the Cyrillic script, right, you end up having Russian and other languages that I don't know. But anyway, this is known as the Linear B script. It was actually translated in the middle of the 20th century, like middle of the 1900s. Some guy just was able to translate it after some very, very hard work, a guy by the name of Michael Ventris. And what you guys are reading for Friday are translations of this script, of tablets that look like this, that were originally put onto raw clay, and then when the palaces burnt down, they like the clay baked and they became preserved. So you're going to see what those things say and try to interpret Bronze Age culture from those tablets. Now, one of the crazy things that happens is everywhere across the Mediterranean, right around 1200, right around 1100 BC, things collapse. All these palaces on Crete, on the mainland, around the Mediterranean at this time, in Egypt, right, with these sea peoples. It's all happening right around the same time. Things are falling apart. And we're going to look at next week what some of the causes are. And one of the very popular ones is that these sea peoples, which the Egyptians write about, are the cause of that collapse. So, awesome job today, guys. That is it for today. For Friday, what I would like you guys to do is read through those Linear B tablets, write your week 3 reading response, and then we will pick it up with a little bit of a discussion of what I want you guys to do for the final project. That's going to be our main thing to do on Friday. And then we'll talk a little bit about the honors project as well for those that it's relevant for. Have a great couple days, and I will see you then. All right, bye everyone.